The capital city of Ethelgard did not know the night. It was a sprawling golden cancer of light on the surface of the planet core, a testament to a civilization that had forgotten the meaning of darkness. Thousands of anti-gravity skiffs wove through the crystalline spires like bioluminescent fish, carrying the elite of the High Throne to the Festival of Unity. The air smelled of ozone, expensive perfume, and the faint copper tang of manufactured weather. High atop the spire of verdicts, Kyle Voss stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the glittering lie below. He was a man carved from the same hard geology as the frontier worlds he had conquered. His dress uniform was a stark, midnight blue, heavy with the platinum medals of the Star Executioner. He was the Empire's fist, the man who had burned the orbital shipyards of Proxima and silenced the uprising in the Cobalt sector. He was 7 feet of genetically optimized muscle and tactical brilliance. Yet here, amidst the silk banners and holographic fireworks, he felt like a wolf trapped in a perfume shop. To the citizens down below, the war on the frontier was a distant rumor, a heroic ballad sung by state media. To Kale, it was the smell of burning flesh and the silence of dead vacuums. A soft hand touched the rigid plating of his shoulder. "Come away from the window." "Kale," a voice said, "you look like you are calculating the structural weakness of the ballroom." Kale turned. The tension in his jaw loosened. Just a fraction. Mira Hale stood in the archway. She was small compared to him, a human woman in a galaxy of towering, genetically sculpted imperialists. But she held the room with a gravity all her own. She wore a gown of deep crimson, a color the High Throne associated with war, but on her, it looked like defiance. "I am always calculating structural weaknesses," Kale said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "It is how I kept breathing for 50 years. Mira walked to him, the fabric of her dress whispering against the polished floor. She did not flinch at the scarring on his face or the cold, cybernetic glint in his left eye. She reached up and adjusted the collar of his uniform, her fingers lingering on the platinum star pinned to his chest. "The war is over, Kale," she said softly. "We ended it. Do not let them make you fight it again in your head." Kale looked down at her. It still baffled him, this creature of soft skin and stubborn hope. 6 months ago, she had walked into his command tent on the mud world of Oreo 3, unarmed, holding a white flag that was already stained with soot. The skirmishes between the expanding empire and the human coalition had cost 10 million lives. Mira Hale, a diplomat from a desperate and battering Earth, had looked the Star Executioner in the eye and offered him a logic colder than his own weapon systems. Continued war would bankrupt the Empire's iridium reserves within 2 years. She had proposed a union, a political marriage. It was archaic, medieval, and utterly brilliant. The High Throne had accepted because they needed the metal. The humans had accepted because they needed to survive. But somewhere between the treaty signing and the voyage to the capital, the political theater had bled into reality. Kale had expected a hostage. He had found a woman who made him laugh at the absurdity of his own reputation. "They tolerate us, Mira," Kale said, looking back at the city. "They do not accept us." Mira stood beside him, looking out at the golden sprawl. "I do not need them to accept me," she said. "I just need them to stop shooting my people. And if I have to endure 1,000 cocktails with your stuffy admirals to keep the peace, I will drink every single one." Kale actually smiled. It was a rare, jagged expression. "You have a higher tolerance for poison than I do. It is called diplomacy. Darling, try it sometime. Below them." The Grand Plaza was filling with millions of citizens. They were cheering for the Emperor, cheering for the unity, cheering for the peace that Kale and Mira had bought with their own lives. But Kale knew the truth. The High Throne did not like peace. Peace was bad for control. Peace allowed people to think, and thinking was dangerous. In the great hall of the palace, the air was thick with the hum of conversation and the chiming of crystal. Lyra Saren moved through the crowd like a ghost wrapped in starlight. She was the crown princess, the ceremonial heir to the High Throne, and she was perfect. Her skin was the pale violet of the upper atmosphere, her eyes large and dark, devoid of pupils. She had been bred and trained for 100 years to be the living symbol of the Empire's purity. She smiled at a governor. She nodded at a general. She accepted a glass of nectar from a servant. Every movement was choreographed, every word scripted. But behind her dark eyes, a storm was brewing. She watched Kale and Mira enter the hall. The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Then the chatter resumed, louder and more frantic, as if to drown out the presence of the alien woman. Lyra had been raised on the purity doctrine. It was the foundational text of their civilization. It stated that the Empire was the apex of evolution, and that mixing with lesser species was a degradation of the cosmic order. By that law, Mira Hale was a contaminant. Yet when Lyra looked at them, she did not see contamination. She saw the way Kale, a man who terrified entire solar systems, positioned his body to shield Mira from the press of the crowd. She saw the way Mira whispered something to him, causing the giant soldier to look down with an expression of profound, bewildered tenderness. It was disgusting. According to her tutors, it was beautiful. According to a part of Lyra she was terrified to acknowledge. A heavy hand landed on Lyra's shoulder. She did not jump. She was trained not to. "Your Highness," a voice oozed. It was Lord Vane, a senior diplomat with a smile like an open wound. He held a goblet of wine, his eyes fixed on Kale and Mira across the room. "Quite a spectacle, isn't it?" Vane said, swirling his wine. "To see the star executioner playing nursemaid to a primate." Lyra kept her face impassive. "They are the architects of the peace, Lord Vane. We must show respect." Vane chuckled. A wet, unpleasant sound. "Peace is a pause. Your Highness, nothing more. Look at him. He has finally been domesticated. It is tragic, really. A wolf on a leash is no longer a wolf. It is just a dog waiting to be put down." Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Be careful, Lord Vane," she said softly. "Even a domesticated wolf has teeth." Vane just laughed and moved away, heading toward the inner circle of the Security Council. Lyra watched him go, her stomach twisting. She knew that look. It was the look of a man who knew the punchline to a joke that no one else had heard yet. Later that night, the noise of the festival was a dull roar beyond the heavy blast glass of Kale's private quarters. The room was stark, military in its precision, save for the chaotic pile of books Mira had brought with her from Earth. Kale sat on the edge of the bed, his dress uniform discarded, wearing simple fatigue trousers. The cybernetic port on his temple hummed softly as it cycled down from combat readiness. Mira sat behind him, her fingers working a knot of tension out of his neck. "You were tense tonight," she said, "more than usual." "I smell a trap." Kale grunted. "Vane, the High Justicar, the way the security grid was routed away from the diplomatic sector. It feels engineered." Mira leaned forward, resting her chin on his scarred shoulder. "You see battlefields everywhere, Kale, even in a ballroom. Because the ballroom is a battlefield. Mira, the weapons are just smaller." She turned him around, forcing him to look at her. Her human eyes were brown, a color the Empire considered dull, but to Kale, they were deep and warm, like the soil of a living world. "Listen to me," she said, her voice fierce. "We did the right thing. The killing has stopped. Farmers on the frontier are planting crops instead of digging graves. That is real. That is worth the risk." "I am not afraid of the risk," Kale said. "I am afraid of losing the reason I took it." The admission hung in the air, heavy and terrified. For a man who had sent thousands to their deaths, admitting he had something to lose was the ultimate vulnerability. Mira kissed him then. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of two people trying to forget a war. It was slow, deliberate, and devastatingly tender. It was a claim. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered against his lips. "I am stubborn. You knew that when you married me." Kyle pulled her down onto the bed, in the darkness of the room. Stripped of his armor and his rank, the star executioner ceased to exist. There was only a man, touching a woman with a reverence that bordered on religious. It was consensual, equal, and intensely human. For the Empire, power was about domination, standing above someone with a boot on their neck. But as Kale held Mira, he realized the Empire was wrong. Real power was trusting someone enough to let them see you break. He fell asleep with the sound of her heartbeat in his ear, the only rhythm that made sense in a chaotic universe. The wake-up call was not a gentle chime. It was the scream of a siren that Kale had not heard since the siege of Antares. He was out of bed and holding a pulse pistol before his eyes fully opened. The room was bathed in emergency red light. "Report," he barked at the room's AI. "Explosion in the North District." The computer's synthetic voice replied, "Level 4 casualty event. Sector 7 transport hub has been vaporized." Kale's blood ran cold. The North District was housing the visiting human delegation. Mira was sitting up, clutching the sheets. "My team," she whispered. "My staff is in the North District." Kale was already pulling on his combat armor, the magnetic plates snapping into place with loud cracks. "Stay here. Lock the door. Override code Alpha 9. Do not open it for anyone but me. Kale, I will find them. Mira, I promise. But you must stay safe." He turned to leave, but the door hissed open before he could reach it. Standing in the corridor was not a rescue team. It was a squad of the Imperial Guard, their white armor gleaming under the red strobe lights. They were the elite Praetorians, the Emperor's personal hunters. "Commander Voss," the lead officer said. His voice was amplified, robotic. "Step away from the human." Kale did not step away. He stepped between Mira and the squad, his pistol raised. "What is the meaning of this, Captain? I am the High Commander of the fleet. Stand down." The captain did not lower his weapon. "Your command codes have been suspended. Voss, we are operating under the direct authority of the Security Council. We have evidence that the attack on the North District was coordinated from this room." "That is a lie," Kale growled, the targeting reticle in his cybernetic eye painting the captain's throat with a kill marker. "Surrender the human," the captain said, "or we will open fire." Kale's mind raced. He could kill them. He could drop all 6 of them in less than 2 seconds. But they were in the heart of the Imperial Palace. Reinforcements would be endless. If he started a firefight here, Mira would die in the crossfire. He felt Mira's hand on his back. "Kale," she said. Her voice was shaking, but clear. "Don't!" He glanced back at her. "They will kill you. Mira, if you fight, you prove them right," she said. "You prove we are savages, and you prove that peace is impossible." She stepped out from behind him, her hands raised. She wore a simple nightgown, looking small and fragile against the armored giants. "I am Mira Hale, ambassador of the Human Coalition. I have committed no crime. I surrender to the investigation." "Mira, no!" Kale roared, lunging forward. Two Praetorians hit him with stun batons. The charge was enough to drop a rhino, but Kale only stumbled, his roar turning into a snarl of rage. He swung his pistol, cracking the helmet of the nearest guard, but three more piled onto him, pinning his arms with magnetic shackles. The captain grabbed Mira roughly by the arm. "Mira Hale, you are under arrest for treason against the cosmic order and conspiracy to commit terror." They dragged her into the hallway. She looked back at Kale, who was struggling against the weight of four armored men, his eyes burning with a fury that could ignite stars. "Stay human. Kale," she shouted as the doors slid shut. "Do not let them turn you into a monster." Then she was gone. The next 48 hours were a blur of Kafkaesque nightmare. Kale, stripped of his weapons but too dangerous to imprison without a trial, tore through the capital's legal system like a hurricane hitting a mountain. He demanded audiences. He threatened admirals. He called in debts from every sector governor he had ever saved. It was silence. A wall of polite, terrifying silence. The high throne had closed ranks. The narrative was already set. The media was broadcasting footage of human extremists planting antimatter charges. It was a fabrication, a crude deep fake, but it was playing on a loop on every screen in the galaxy. Kale stormed the chambers of the High Justicar, a withered alien with skin like parchment. "She is innocent." "Valen!" Kale slammed his fist onto the desk, cracking the marble. "This is a false flag. You know it. I know it." The High Justicar looked up, his eyes milky and bored. "Truth is a flexible commodity. Commander Voss, the people are frightened. They need a villain. The human woman fits the shape of their fear." "She is my wife." "She is a political error," the Justicar corrected. "And errors must be erased. Article 42 of the Purity Doctrine clearly states that any non-citizen posing a threat to imperial stability may be liquidated." "I will burn this city to the ground," Kale whispered. The Justicar smiled. "And that is why you are dangerous. Kale, you have been compromised. You have let emotions infect your logic. Go home. Mourn. We will find you a new assignment in the Outer Rim. Something quiet." Kale was escorted out by a dozen guards. He stood in the rain outside the Justice Hall, feeling a helplessness he had never known. He was the most powerful warrior in the Empire, and he could not stop the pen strokes of old men. The execution was scheduled for noon on the Festival of Truth. It was to be held in the Plaza of Ascendance, broadcast live to 400 star systems. The Empire wanted the galaxy to watch. They wanted to send a message. The experiment is over. Order is restored. Kale stood at the edge of the plaza. He was surrounded by a cordon of security shielding, unable to get closer than 500 yards. He was not in uniform. He wore a dark cloak, his face hidden, but everyone knew he was there. The crowd gave him a wide berth, sensing the radioactive heat of his rage. Up on the raised dais, Mira knelt. She had been beaten. Her face was bruised, her lips split, but she held her head high. She wore a prisoner's gray tunic. Behind her stood the royal executioner, a towering figure with a molecular severance blade that hummed with a sick, violet light. In the VIP box high above the plaza, Princess Lyra watched. Her hands were gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white. She wanted to look away. She wanted to scream. But she was frozen by the horror of the machine she was part of. She saw Mira look into the camera drone hovering in front of her. Any final words? "Heretic?" The executioner boomed, his voice amplified across the city. Mira smiled. It was the same smile she had given Kale on the mud world of Oreo 3. Stubborn. Hopeful. "You can kill the dreamer," she said, her voice clear and unbroken. "But you cannot kill the dream. I love you. Kale. Forgive them." She looked directly toward where Kale stood in the crowd. She found him instantly, as if their souls were tethered. Kyle's hand gripped the energy barrier. He screamed her name, a sound of raw animal agony that cut through the silence of the crowd. Mira. The executioner raised the blade. Lyra closed her eyes. The blade fell. A flash of violet light severed the air. Silence. The crowd did not cheer. They were too stunned by the intimacy of the violence. A voice, soft and terrified, whispered through the plaza's audio feed, perhaps a narrator from the propaganda wing who had forgotten to cut his mic, or perhaps a rebel jamming the frequency. The words floated over the stunned millions like a prophecy. They executed his human bride. What he did next shattered a 1,000-year empire. The broadcast ended. The screens went black. Snow began to fall, not water, but the ash from the ceremonial pyres, drifting down to cover the golden streets in gray. The crowd dispersed quickly, fearful of the mood in the air. The plaza emptied, leaving only the stains on the dais and one figure standing at the barrier. Kyle Voss did not move. The security shield deactivated. The guards, unnerved by his stillness, backed away. Kyle walked forward. He climbed the steps of the dais. He fell to his knees in the ash, right where she had knelt. He touched the spot where her blood had burned into the stone. He did not cry. The tears had evaporated, replaced by something hotter, something denser. Inside his mind, the grief was a roaring ocean, threatening to drown him. "Forgive them," she had said. He closed his eyes. He saw the High Justicar's bored face. He saw the diplomat Vane's sneer. He saw the Emperor's signature on the death warrant. Forgiveness was a luxury of the living. Mira was dead, and with her, the Kale Voss who believed in peace died too. He opened his eyes. The cybernetic lens whirred, shifting from blue to a deep, combat-ready red. He stood up. He did not look like a man who had been defeated. He looked like a man who was recalibrating his entire existence. He turned his back on the palace, on the flags, on the lie of the unity. He walked into the falling ash, his footsteps heavy and final. He was not going to run. He was going to work. And when he was finished, there would be no more executioners, because there would be no one left to give the orders. The galaxy had forgotten Kale Voss, and that was exactly how he wanted it. In the 6 months since the execution, the official Imperial news feeds had cycled through a dozen different stories. Some said the Star Executioner had taken his own life in a fit of madness. Others claimed he had fled to the lawless Outer Rim to live as a mercenary warlord. The High Throne encouraged these rumors because a madman or a criminal was easier to dismiss than the truth. The truth was that Kale Voss was buried 3 miles beneath the surface of a dead moon in the Omicron sector. Reading history, the moon, known only as Tomb World 7, was a graveyard of the progenitors, a civilization that had vanished 10,000 years ago. The atmosphere was thin and toxic, the surface scoured by silica storms that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. Kyle had breached the ancient blast doors of a submerged data temple using codes he had confiscated during the war. Codes he was supposed to have destroyed inside the archive. The air was still and cold, preserved by stasis fields. Kyle sat in the center of a vast circular room, illuminated only by the holographic blue sphere of the archive's interface. He looked different. His beard had grown out, thick and dark, hiding the sharp line of his jaw. His uniform was gone, replaced by scavenged blast armor painted a dull, non-reflective gray. But his eyes were the same, burning with a focus that was terrifying to behold. For weeks, he had been sifting through the progenitor's predictive algorithms and the Empire's deepest, most encrypted naval logs. He was looking for the reason why Mira had died. He knew the official reason: treason, purity, order, was a lie. But he had assumed the real reason was simple bigotry. He was wrong. It was mathematics. Cale swiped his hand through the data stream, expanding a logistical chart from the 3rd century of the Empire. He overlaid it with the casualty reports from the frontier war he had just finished fighting. The patterns matched perfectly. The war had not been a struggle for survival. It had been a controlled burn. The data was irrefutable. Every time the Empire's iridium stockpiles reached a surplus that might lower the market price, a new conflict erupted on the border. Every time the population of the core worlds grew restless or demanded political reform, a threat was manufactured to terrify them back into submission. The High Throne had engineered the slaughter of millions, including his own soldiers, simply to maintain artificial scarcity. They kept the galaxy poor so they could remain the only source of wealth. They kept the galaxy afraid so they could remain the only source of safety. Mira had not just threatened their purity doctrine. By proposing peace, she had threatened their business model. Cale sat back in the darkness, the holographic light washing over his scarred face. The grief that had been drowning him for half a year suddenly crystallized. It hardened. Grief, he realized, was a raw material. Left alone, it was a poison that would rot him from the inside out. But if he refined it, if he compressed it under the weight of this new truth, it became fuel. He stood up. The silence of the tomb was broken by the sound of a weapon charging. "It is time to go back to work," Kyle said to the empty room. Light years away, in the perfumed air of the Imperial Palace, Princess Lyra Saren stood before the High Council. She wore the ceremonial white armor of the Royal Vanguard, a stark contrast to the flowing silk gowns she usually wore for court functions. The armor was lightweight, made of ceramic composites, but it felt heavy on her shoulders. Lord Vane sat at the head of the obsidian table, picking at a bowl of exotic fruit. He did not look up when he spoke. "We are disappointed, Your Highness." Lyra kept her hands clasped behind her back. "I have attended every function. Lord Vane, I have smiled until my face aches. I have repeated the Unity Catechisms. It is not your public face that concerns us," Vane said, finally looking at her. His eyes were flat and predatory. "It is your private hesitation. You were seen weeping in the chapel after the execution." "I was mourning the disruption of order," Lyra lied smoothly. Vane smiled, and it was a terrible thing to witness. "Grief implies attachment, Princess, and attachment to a traitor suggests treason. The Emperor is concerned that your heart is not as hard as the throne you will one day inherit." "I am loyal," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her hearts. "Then prove it," Vane said. He tapped the table, and a holographic image of a star system appeared. "Rumors place the traitor Cale Voss in the Omicron sector. Our intelligence suggests he is planning to resurface. And you will hunt him down," Vane said. "You have completed the Vanguard training. You are a qualified pilot and marksman. Take a squadron. Find the Star Executioner. Bring us his head." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "You want me to kill Cale Voss? He is a war hero. He is a rogue element," Vane corrected. "And if you fail to eliminate him, we will be forced to conclude that you sympathize with his corruption. Do not return without proof of his death. Lyra, for your own sake." The hunt led her to the edge of civilization. Lyra had expected Kale to be hiding on a paradise world or a high-tech station. Instead, the tracking data, scraps of ion trails and encrypted burst transmissions, led her to Tartarus 4. It was a mining world, a ball of rock choked by smog and acid rain. The Empire had stripped the planet's atmosphere to fuel the foundries, leaving the population to live in pressurized habdomes that smelled of sweat and recycled sulfur. Lyra walked through the muddy streets of the main settlement, her white armor stained with soot within minutes. She had ordered her squadron to hold orbit. This was something she needed to do alone. She told herself it was for stealth, but deep down, she knew she did not want witnesses to whatever happened when she found him. What she saw on Tartarus 4 shattered her. She saw children, barely old enough to speak, coughing up black dust as they hauled filter cartridges. She saw Imperial overseers whipping alien workers who collapsed from exhaustion. She saw a food riot broken up by peacekeeper drones that fired indiscriminately into the crowd. This was the empire she was sworn to protect. This was the source of the gold that lined the palace walls. "Is this what you are looking for, Princess?" The voice came from the shadows of a derelict smelting plant. Lyra spun around, her hand dropping to the energy blade at her hip. Kale Voss stepped out of the darkness. He looked massive in the gloom, his gray armor chipped and scarred. He held a heavy pulse rifle, but it was pointed at the ground. He did not look like the gallant officer she remembered from the ballroom. He looked like a landslide given human form. "You are a long way from your velvet cushions." "Lyra," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. Lyra drew her blade. The hum of the weapon was the only clean sound in the dirty alley. "I am here to carry out the Emperor's justice. Kale, surrender, and I will make it quick." Kale laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. "The Emperor's justice. Look around you, girl. Look at this world. This is the Emperor's justice. Starvation, slavery. Is this what you are fighting for?" "I am fighting for order," Lyra shouted, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "You abandoned your duty. You betrayed us." "I woke up," Kale said. He took a step forward. "You are not a soldier, Lyra. You are a hood ornament. You are a pretty cage with golden bars, and you do not even realize you are locked inside." Lyra lunged. She was fast, trained by the best duelists in the court. But Kale was a veteran of 1,000 battles. He sidestepped her thrust with contemptuous ease, catching her wrist in a grip of iron. He twisted, and her blade clattered to the wet pavement. He shoved her back, and she stumbled against the rusted wall of the smelter. "You are a blade without a hand to guide it. Kale," she spat, rubbing her bruised wrist. "You are just striking out at the world because you are in pain." "Pain is a teacher," he said calmly. "You should try listening to it." Before Lyra could retort, the air above them shimmered. 3 figures decloaked on the rooftops surrounding the alley. They were clad in sleek, matte black armor that absorbed the light. Shadow stalkers. The Emperor's personal assassination cadre. Lyra froze. Shadow stalkers did not operate this far out unless the target was critical. "Vanguard leader Saren," the lead assassin hissed, his voice modulated to a metallic scratch. "Step away from the target." Lyra straightened up, relieved. "He is unarmed," she said. "I am taking him into custody." "Negative," the assassin said. "Our orders are to sanitize the area. No witnesses, no survivors." Lyra blinked. "I am the Crown Princess. You do not give orders to me." The assassin raised his rifle. "The order comes from the High Throne. Highness, you are considered a loose end. Collateral damage is acceptable." The betrayal hit Lyra harder than Kale's shove. She had been sent here not to kill Kale, but to be buried alongside him. Vane had never intended for her to return. "Get down!" Cale roared. He moved with a speed that defied his size. He tackled Lyra just as the alley erupted in laser fire. Beams of superheated energy scorched the wall where she had been standing a second before. Kyle dragged her behind a heavy ore crusher. He pulled a flash grenade from his belt and hurled it over their cover. "Cover your eyes!" The grenade detonated with a blinding white flash. Cale popped up, his pulse rifle barking 3 times in rapid succession. One assassin fell from the roof, his chest a smoking ruin. "Run!" Cale commanded, hauling Lyra to her feet. They sprinted through the maze of the smelting plant, laser fire chewing up the ground at their heels. Lyra's mind was reeling, her entire reality fracturing, but her body went into autopilot. She followed the big man, trusting his instincts because she had no other choice. They reached a docking bay where a battered, unmarked freighter was idling. Cale shoved her up the ramp and slammed the airlock seal just as a plasma bolt struck the hull. "Get to the cockpit!" he shouted. "Can you fly this junk? I can fly anything!" Lyra snapped, adrenaline overriding her shock. She threw herself into the pilot's seat. The controls were old and greasy, but she recognized the layout. She punched the thrusters, and the ship screamed into the sky, breaking orbit before the shadow stalkers could mobilize their interceptors. Once they were safe in hyperspace, the silence in the ship was deafening. Kyle stood in the cramped common area, stripping off his damaged chest plate. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm, but he ignored it. Lyra sat on a crate, staring at her hands. They were shaking. "They tried to kill me," she whispered. "My own father's guard. Your father is a figurehead," Kyle said, grabbing a medkit from the wall. "The council runs the show, and you were becoming inconvenient." "Why did you save me?" she asked, looking up at him. Her violet eyes were wide, searching his face. "You hate me. I represent everything you despise." Kyle applied a synth skin patch to his arm, wincing slightly. He looked at her with a brutal honesty that was almost refreshing. "I do not hate you, Lyra. I pity you, and I did not save you out of kindness." "Then why?" "Because you have high-level clearance codes for the Imperial Navigational Grid," Cale said, a dark, dry smirk touching his lips. "And I need to move this ship through the blockade zones without getting vaporized. You are my passkey. Princess, do not flatter yourself." Lyra let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You are an insufferable pragmatist, Voss, and you are a fugitive. Saren, welcome to the Resistance." He tossed a data pad onto her lap. "Read that." "What is it?" "The reason Mira died." Lyra hesitated, then activated the pad. It contained the files Cale had pulled from the dead moon, the resource charts, the manufactured wars, and at the end, a personal log from Mira herself, dated 2 days before her arrest. She had found a ledger, a corruption index linking the Security Council to illegal weapon sales on both sides of the war. Mira had not just been a peacemaker. She had been a whistleblower. Lyra read through the night. As she read, the image of the human woman shifted in her mind. Mira was no longer just a victim or a symbol. She was a brilliant, brave investigator who had walked into the lion's den armed only with the truth. Lyra felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. She found herself mourning a woman she had never spoken to, realizing that Mira Hale had possessed more nobility in her little finger than the entire High Council possessed in their collective bloodline. When Cale returned to the common room hours later, Lyra was still staring at the screen. "She knew," Lyra said softly. "She knew they were going to kill her, and she stayed anyway to hide this data. She stayed because she thought she could change them." Cale said, his voice low. She thought if she showed them the truth, they would stop. She underestimated their greed. "I am sorry," Lyra said. It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of a collapsing worldview. "I am sorry I did not stop it." Kyle looked at her. The anger that usually simmered in his eyes had cooled into something more complex. He saw the crack in her perfect porcelain shell. "You could not have stopped it," he said. "But you can help me make sure they never do it again." The tension between them shifted. It was no longer the hostility of enemies, but the charged, dangerous electricity of two predators circling each other in the dark. Kale was broken, jagged edges and raw force. Lyra was proud, refined, but shaking apart at the seams. They were opposites, yet they were the only two people in the galaxy who knew the truth. There was an attraction there, undeniable and sharp. It wasn't soft. It was the pull of gravity between two collapsing stars. "I am not your prisoner," Lyra said, standing up. She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "No." Kyle agreed. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, testing her resolve. "You are a volunteer. But if you get in my way, Lyra, I will leave you on the nearest asteroid." "Try it," she challenged, her chin lifting. "And I will scramble your navigation code so badly you will be flying in circles until your oxygen runs out." Kyle stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Keep that fire. You are going to need it." The resistance cell Kyle had assembled was not an army. It was a mess. They rendezvoused at a hollowed-out asteroid in the debris belt of the Vega system. The base was a patchwork of welded scrap and stolen tech. Lyra met the crew with a mixture of horror and fascination. There was Jax, a reptilian deserter from the Imperial Navy who flew the ship with his feet and smoked hallucinogenic roots. There was Ilara, a human smuggler with a cybernetic arm and a vocabulary that made Kale blush. And there was Five, a defected logic droid that had reprogrammed itself to understand sarcasm and now refused to calculate odds because it found them depressing. When Lyra walked into the mess hall, the room went silent. "Is that the princess?" Jax asked, a smoke ring drifting from his snout. "Should we bow or shoot her? If she tries to give a speech..." "Shoot her," Ilara muttered, cleaning her blaster. "She is with me," Kyle announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "She has the clearance codes we need to breach the net. 5-word. Probability of royal betrayal is calculated at 82%. Suggestion: airlock." "I am not going to betray you," Lyra said, stepping forward. She looked at the ragtag group, her white armor gleaming amidst the grime. "And I can fix that hyperdrive you have been arguing about for the last hour. Your induction coil is misaligned." Ilara raised an eyebrow. "The princess gets her hands dirty?" "I am an engineer by training," Lyra said coolly. "The Empire requires its rulers to understand the fleets they command. Unlike you, I do not just kick the engine until it works." Jax laughed, a wheezing sound. "I like her. She bites." The integration was rocky. Lyra struggled with the lack of protocol, the terrible food, and the constant disrespect. The crew struggled with her haughty tone and her insistence on using napkins. But Kale watched it happen. He saw Lyra crawling through maintenance ducts to patch conduits. He heard her arguing strategy with Ilara until late in the night. She was shedding the palace like a snake shedding skin, revealing something tougher underneath. And she watched him. She saw the way he checked the perimeter sweeps 3 times a night. She saw him staring at old holo photos of Mira when he thought no one was looking. One night, in the cockpit, the silence between them broke. "You are planning something," Lyra said. "You are not just gathering resources, you are building a weapon, not a weapon," Kyle said, A microphone. He pointed out the viewport at the stars. The Empire controls the narrative. They control what people see and hear. As long as they control the truth, we are just bandits. We need to break their silence. He reached over and flipped a switch on the console. A massive array of dishes on the asteroid's surface began to rotate, aligning with the nearest subspace relay. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked. "Sending greeting cards," Kyle said. He opened a channel. It was not a narrow beam. It was a flood broadcast, pushed with enough power to hijack every civilian frequency, every holovis, and every datapad in 5 sectors. Kyle leaned into the receiver. He did not shout. His voice was the cold, calm tone of a judge delivering a sentence. "Citizens of the Empire. My name is Cale Voss. You were told I was dead. You were told the war was for your safety. You were told Mira Hale was a traitor." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy across the light years. "You were lied to. The war was a business transaction. Your dead sons and daughters were currency. And Mira Hale died because she tried to save you from the theft." He looked at Lyra. She nodded, her eyes fierce. She keyed in her royal override code, smashing through the Empire's censorship firewalls. "We are not here to ask for justice," Cale said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the rumble of an approaching earthquake. "The High Throne cannot give what it does not possess. We are here to deliver consequence." He cut the feed. The silence returned to the cockpit, but it felt different now. It was the silence before the avalanche. Kyle looked at Lyra. "There is no going back now." Lyra looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the viewport. The princess was gone. The revolutionary was staring back. "I do not want to go back," she said. Cale signaled Jax. "Get us out of here. The whole fleet will be hunting us in 10 minutes. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving a streak of blue fire in the void, the galaxy began to wake up. And in the high towers of the capital, for the first time in 1,000 years, the masters of the universe felt a shiver of fear. The raid on the Valestia orbital nexus was not a battle. It was a surgical dissection performed with heavy ordnance. The nexus served as the primary refueling artery for the Imperial Third Fleet, a sprawling lattice of docking arms and fuel refineries hanging in the void above a gas giant. It was defended by 3 heavy cruisers and a swarm of automated drone fighters. Cale Voss ignored them all. He piloted their stolen heavy freighter, now rechristened the Broken Chain, through the magnetic interference of the gas giant's rings. He flew with the lights off, the shields down, and the engines running on a silent, dangerously low output. Beside him in the cockpit, Jax, the reptilian pilot, was sweating, his claws digging into the armrests. "You are insane, boss," Jax hissed. "We are going to scrape the paint off the hull." "Keep her steady," Cale growled, his eyes fixed on the sensor scope. "We are not here to fight the fleet. We are here to poison the well." Cale did not target the fuel tanks. Destroying them would only cause a shortage, which the Empire would blame on terrorists. Instead, he targeted the communication buoys that synchronized the station's logistics with the capital. "Ilara, now!" Cale shouted. In the gunnery chair, Ilara unleashed a torrent of ion bolts. They didn't detonate the station, they fried the firewall shielding the central data core. Simultaneously, Lyra Saren sat in the engineering bay, her hands flying across a stolen encryption deck. She wasn't firing weapons. She was firing truth. "I am in," Lyra said over the comms, uploading the payload. The payload was simple. It was the raw financial data Cale had recovered from the dead moon. It showed that the fuel at this station, fuel that the citizens were told was scarce and rationed, was actually being vented into space by the thousands of tons to keep prices artificially high. as the broken chain roared past the station, its engines finally flaring to full power. Every screen on the Nexus, every data pad in the local system, and every holovis on the 3 defending cruisers turned bright red. The financial logs scrolled rapidly, accompanied by a voiceover recorded by Kale. You freeze so they can buy gold. You starve so they can feast. Look at the numbers. The scarcity is a lie. The defending cruisers hesitated. Kale saw it on the tactical plot. For 10 seconds, the gunners didn't fire. They were reading. "Get us out of here," Kale ordered. Jax punched the hyperdrive. The stars elongated into streaks of white fire, and the broken chain vanished, leaving behind a station that was intact, but politically radioactive. The strategy was working. Over the next 3 weeks, Kale and his ragtag crew struck 6 more targets. They raided a munitions factory, not to blow it up, but to broadcast the safety violations that had killed hundreds of workers. They intercepted a luxury liner carrying tax revenues, jettisoned the credits into the atmosphere of a poverty-stricken colony world, and disappeared before the escort ships could arm their weapons. They were not just fighting a war. They were conducting an exorcism. They were dragging the Empire's demons into the light. Lyra became the ghost in the machine. She used her knowledge of Imperial protocol to wreak havoc on the intelligence networks. She spoofed orders, sending supply convoys to the wrong sectors. She flagged loyalist admirals as potential traitors, causing the Security Council to waste weeks investigating their own people. But her masterpiece was the Feast of the Ascendant Sun. It was the holiest day in the Imperial calendar, a ceremony broadcast live from the great cathedral in the capital. The high priest was scheduled to read the Liturgy of Order, a text that reaffirmed the divine right of the throne. Billions of citizens were watching. Lyra did not attend. She was light years away, sitting in the mess hall of the broken chain, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hand and a malicious smile on her face. "Watch this," she told the crew. On the screen, the high priest stepped up to the golden podium. He raised his hands. Holographic scrolls materialized in the air before him, the text scrolling for him to read. "Citizens of the Empire," the priest intoned, his voice booming. "We gather today to celebrate the eternal wisdom of the throne. We give thanks for the..." The priest paused. He squinted at the holographic text. He looked confused, but the ceremony demanded he continue without breaking rhythm. He cleared his throat and read what was in front of him. "We give thanks for the blindfold that covers our eyes. We praise the silence that chokes our throats. We honor the blood of the innocent, which cements the stones of this palace." A ripple of shock went through the congregation in the cathedral. The camera drone zoomed in on the priest's sweating face. He tried to stop, but the text scrolling before him was moving faster, and he was trained to recite, not to think. "Let us pray for the continued ignorance that keeps us on our knees." The priest read, his voice trembling. "For if we stood up, we would see that the gods are just men with small hearts and large banks." The feed was cut abruptly. Static filled the screen. The mess hall on the broken chain erupted in cheers. Jax slapped the table so hard he dented it. Ilara was laughing until she cried. But Kyle did not laugh. He was watching Lyra. She was not laughing either. She was staring at the static, her expression complicated. She had just desecrated the religion she was raised in. She had humiliated the class of people she once called family. Kale walked over to her. He didn't say anything in front of the crew. He just touched her shoulder, a brief, grounding pressure. "Come with me," he said quietly. The broken chain had a small observation blister on the upper hull, a bubble of reinforced glass that looked out into the infinite black. It was the only place on the ship where the hum of the engines was quiet. Kyle stood looking out at the stars. Lyra sat on the metal bench, her knees drawn up to her chest. "You did good today," Kyle said. "You shook them." "I humiliated him," Lyra whispered. "High Priest Orin. He taught me my letters when I was a child. He used to sneak me sweets during the long sermons. He is part of the machine." "Lyra." "I know," she snapped, looking up. "I know what he is. But it does not make it feel like victory. It feels like parricide." Kale turned to face her. The shadows of the room softened the hard lines of his face. "Revolutions are not clean," he said. "You tear down the house you lived in. You are going to get covered in dust." Lyra let out a shaky breath. She unfolded her legs and stood up, walking to the glass. She stood next to him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of jasmine soap she still managed to hoard. "I never wanted to burn anything down, Kyle," she said softly. "I just wanted to live. I was the perfect doll. They dressed me, they posed me, they told me what to say. I never made a choice, not once. Until the day I got on this ship." Kale looked at her. He saw the strength beneath the porcelain, the steel spine that had kept her upright under the crushing weight of expectation. "You chose to save me on the mining world," he said. "You chose to stay. I chose to run," she corrected. "There is a difference." She turned to him. The starlight caught the unshed tears in her dark, violet eyes. "Do you think we are monsters?" she asked. "For what we are doing?" "I think monsters do not ask that question," Kale replied. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a princess or an asset, but as a woman who was standing in the fire beside him. The tension that had been building between them for weeks, the charged silences in the corridor, the accidental touches over the map table, suddenly pulled tight. Kyle raised his hand. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his own demons whispering that he was too damaged, too blood-stained to touch anything pure. Then he brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His fingers were rough, calloused from war, but his touch was incredibly gentle. "I never believed I deserved anything but the war," Kyle confessed, his voice a low rumble. "When Mira died, I thought that was the universe correcting a mistake. A soldier does not get a home. He gets a grave." Lyra reached up and caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. "You are not a soldier anymore, Kyle. You are just a man, and I am tired of being a symbol. I want something for myself, just one thing that is mine." The air in the observatory changed. It became heavy, electric. "Is this yours?" Kyle asked, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Yes," Lyra breathed. He kissed her. It was not a sudden collision. It was a slow, deliberate coming together. It was the meeting of two people who had been hollowed out by their roles and were finally filling the empty spaces with each other. Lyra's hands tangled in Kale's shirt, pulling him closer. Kale's arms went around her, solid and protective. There was no conquest here. There was no power play. It was a mutual surrender. They moved to the bench, the starlight washing over them. The intimacy that followed was intense, fueled by the adrenaline of their survival and the deep, aching need for connection. Every touch was a confirmation of reality. I am here. You are here. We are alive. For Kyle, it was a release of the cold discipline he had held for decades. For Lyra, it was an act of supreme rebellion to love who she wanted, how she wanted, without the permission of a council or a king. Later, as they lay together in the quiet dark, Kale traced the scars on his own arm. "I will not let them take you," he said. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, as solid as gravity. "And I will not let you become them," Lyra replied, resting her head on his chest. The Empire did not take the humiliation lightly. 3 days later, the retaliation came, but it did not come for the broken chain. It came for the innocent. Cale was in the cockpit when the news feed broke. The Imperial Security Council had issued a statement declaring that the rebellious acts were being harbored by the planetary governor of Oreo 4, a peaceful agricultural world that had shown sympathy to Cale's message. As punishment, the Empire initiated a base Delta Zero bombardment on the planet's southern continent. The feed showed the orbital footage, turbo lasers raining down from star destroyers, cities turning into craters, forests evaporating into ash, millions of people incinerated in seconds to make a point. Cale watched the screen. He went terrifyingly still. The crew was silent. Jax looked away, sickened. Ilara gripped her sidearm until her knuckles were white. Cale stood up. "Set a course for the capital sector," he said. "Cale?" Lyra asked, stepping into the cockpit. She saw his face and stopped. His eyes were red. The cybernetic lens was spinning wildly. The man who had held her with such gentleness the night before was gone. In his place was the Star Executioner. "We are going to the capital," Cale said, his voice devoid of inflection. "We are going to target the kinetic defense platforms. I will turn them inward. I will rain fire on the palace until there is nothing left but glass." "That will kill millions," Lyra said, her voice rising. "The palace is surrounded by residential blocks, workers, families." "They killed Oreo 4, Kyle roared, slamming his fist into the bulkhead. The metal buckled. "They murdered 3 million farmers to get to me. I will not let that stand. I will burn the infection out." He moved toward the navigation console to lock the coordinates himself. "Jax, get out of the chair," Cale ordered. Jax hesitated, looking from Cale to Lyra. "Move!" Cale barked, reaching for his pistol. Lyra stepped in front of him. She did not draw a weapon. She stood between the giant soldier and the controls, her hands empty, her chin high. "Move! Lyra!" Cale warned, his voice shaking with rage. "No! They deserve it. Maybe they do," Lyra said, her voice steady. "But you do not deserve to be the one who does it." She took a step closer to him, right into the radius of his anger. "Look at me. Cale. Look at what you are doing. This is exactly what Vane wants. He wants you to slaughter civilians. He wants you to become the monster he told everyone you are. If you fire on the Capitol, you prove the propaganda right. I do not care about propaganda, I care about justice." "This is not justice," Lyra shouted. "This is vengeance." "And vengeance without limits is just tyranny with a different flag." Cale stared at her, his chest heaving. "They killed her," he whispered, the grief cracking through the rage. "They killed Mira. Now they killed Oreo. When does it stop?" "It stops when we build something better," Lyra said. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that was reaching for the weapon. "Mira did not die so you could become a butcher. Cale. She loved you because you were the one man who could stop the war, not start a new one. Do not spit on her memory by washing it in innocent blood." Cale trembled. The red light in his eye flickered and dimmed back to blue. He looked at Lyra, then at the crew, who were watching him with fear. He realized then how close he had come. He had been standing on the precipice of becoming the very thing he hated. He slumped, the adrenaline draining out of him. "Then what do we do?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We cannot just watch them kill." "No," Lyra said. "We find the head of the snake, and we cut it off." 5. The logic droid beeped from the corner. Statement. Decryption of the Oreo 4 data stream is complete. The attack was not ordered by the Security Council. What? Kale asked, turning. Clarification. The Security Council transmitted the order, but the command origin code is external. It originated from a source designated Eclipse Synod. Kyle and Lyra exchanged a look. Eclipse Synod, Kale repeated. I saw that name in the archives on the dead moon. I thought it was a metaphor. 5 projected a holographic map of the galaxy. Negative. It is an organization. Analysis of the command chain suggests that the Security Council, the High Justicar, and even the Emperor possess only Level 3 clearance. The Eclipse Synod holds Level 1. Lyra stared at the map. You are saying the Emperor is not in charge? The Emperor is a middle manager. Kale realized. He felt a chill go down his spine. We have been fighting the puppets. Show me the source, Kale commanded. Where is the Synod? 5 adjusted the map. The view zoomed out, past the core worlds, past the outer rim, into the uncharted blackness of the intergalactic void. A single pulsing red dot appeared in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a nebula of dark matter. Coordinates correspond to a location outside of Imperial charts, 5 said. It is a region known in ancient texts as the Silent Expanse. There are no stars there, only gravity anomalies and something else. A structure, Lyra whispered, looking at the energy readings. A massive structure. That is where they are, Kale said. The architects, the ones who engineered the scarcity, the ones who decided Mira had to die. Jax looked at the map and gulped. Boss, that is deep space. That is the point of no return. We go out there, we might not have enough fuel to get back. Kale looked at the red dot. He felt a cold, focused clarity settle over him. The rage was gone, replaced by a mission. We are not coming back until they are finished, Kale said. He looked at Lyra. It is a one-way trip. Lyra, you do not have to come. You can take a shuttle. Go into hiding. Lyra took his hand again. She squeezed it hard. I told you in the observatory. Kale, I am done being a passenger. I choose this. She turned to Jax. Lay in the course, Jax. Jax sighed, extinguished his smoke, and grabbed the throttle. Into the dark we go. Then, Kale walked to the viewport. He looked out at the stars one last time before they turned away from the galaxy they knew. He thought of Mira. He thought of the millions dead on Oreo 4. Let's go say hello to the gods, Kale said. The broken chain fired its main thrusters. It pivoted away from the galactic plane, aiming its nose into the empty, terrifying void. With a flash of light that looked like a new star being born, it engaged the hyperdrive and vanished, racing toward the shadow that had been strangling the universe for 1,000 years. The chart ended 3 days ago. Since then, the broken chain had been navigating through a region of space that the navigation computer simply labeled as null. There were no stars here, only the suffocating pressure of the silent expanse. A void between galactic arms where the laws of physics seemed to be engaged in a slow, centuries-long argument with themselves. On the bridge, the lighting was dimmed to a low combat red. Kyle Voss stood at the viewport, watching the darkness. It was not the clean black of normal space. It was a bruised purple, swirling with heavy gases and gravitational riptides that pulled at the ship's hull like invisible hands. We are passing through a time-lensing corridor, 5 announced from the sensor station. The droid's vocabulator buzzed with unease. Suggestion: do not look out the port-side windows. Why? Jax asked, his claws hovering over the throttle. Because, 5 replied, you will see the broken chain 5 minutes in the past. Jax looked. He immediately regretted it. Out in the swirling purple mist, a ghostly echo of their own ship was flying alongside them, silent and spectral. It was a visual echo caused by the intense gravity bending light back upon itself. "I hate this," Jax muttered, refocusing on his instruments. "I hate this place. It feels like the universe is holding its breath." "Keep your eyes forward," Kale ordered. "The Synod chose this place for a reason. They want visitors to turn back." They had been traveling for 2 weeks since leaving the Empire. In that time, the ship had become a crucible. The crew was exhausted, their nerves frayed by the constant anomalies. They had passed drifting megastructures, skeletal rings the size of moons that whispered to them over the comms in dead languages. They had navigated minefields of antimatter that seemed to drift with a predatory intelligence. But the strangest sight of all was happening right now in the engineering bay. Lyra Saren, the crown princess of the Ethelgard Empire, was on her back, sliding out from under the main power coupling. Her face was smudged with grease. Her white hair was tied back with a piece of wire. She held a hydrospanner in one hand and a tube of ration paste in the other. Ilara, the smuggler, leaned against the doorframe, watching with a look of sheer disbelief. "I still cannot process this," Ilara said. "I keep expecting you to order me to peel a grape for you." Lyra sat up, wiping her hands on a rag. She squeezed the tube of ration paste and took a grim bite. "If you peel a grape for me, I will shoot you," Lyra said. "And this coupling is fixed. The primary relay was fused. I bypassed it with a fiber optic shunt." Ilara shook her head. "You are good with a wrench, princess. I will give you that. But how can you eat that stuff? It tastes like despair." Lyra swallowed the paste and grimaced. "It tastes like fuel, but it keeps me moving. And please, stop calling me princess. There are no titles out here. Just crew." Kale walked into the engineering bay. He stopped, looking at Lyra covered in grime, eating the foul paste without complaint. A strange warmth bloomed in his chest, not just attraction but respect. The Empire had built her to be a decoration, but she had dismantled herself and built something useful from the parts. "We have found something," Kale said. Lyra was on her feet instantly. "The Synod? Maybe." 5 picked up a signal. It is not a beacon. It is a loop, an old Imperial frequency, encrypted with codes that haven't been used in 50 years. The source of the signal was a derelict station drifting in the shadow of a gravity well. It was ancient, its hull pitted by micrometeoroids, its design predating the current Imperial aesthetic. It looked like a tomb. Kyle, Lyra, and 5 boarded the station while Jax kept the broken chain ready for a hot extraction. The air inside the station was stale, recycled by emergency systems that were barely functioning. The gravity was low, making their movements dreamlike and slow. They floated through corridors lined with cryotubes. They were all empty. "This was a listening post," Lyra whispered, her voice echoing in her helmet. "The Synod must have used it to monitor the frontier before the expansion." They reached the central data core. It was a massive room filled with towering server banks, most of them dark, but one terminal was blinking with a faint, amber light. Kyle approached it. He plugged 5 into the port. "Crack it," Kyle said. 5-word. "Encryption is obsolete but heavy. Bypassing. Done." The screen flickered to life. A video file appeared. The timestamp was 6 months old. Kale's heart stopped. The face on the screen was Mira. She looked tired. Her hair was messy, and she was glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be interrupted. She was wearing her diplomatic robes, but they were wrinkled. This was recorded just days before her arrest. "Kale," she said. The sound of her voice hit him like a physical blow. He reached out, his gloved fingers touching the cold glass of the screen. "If you are watching this, then I failed," Mira continued. The recording was grainy, distorted by the radiation of the expanse. "I found something, Kale. I thought the corruption was just greed. I thought it was just men wanting power. But it is worse." She leaned closer to the camera. "I found the medical records of the High Council, the security head, the High Priest, even the Emperor. They are all undergoing treatments. They call it life extension, but it is not. It is an implantation." Kale exchanged a look with Lyra. "There is a network," Mira said. "It is biological, or maybe biomechanical, a parasite. It attaches to the brainstem. It does not make them zombies. It is subtle. It amplifies fear. It suppresses empathy. It locks them into a cycle of paranoia and aggression. The Synod isn't just a group of people, Kyle. It is a contagion. They have been infecting the leadership for 1,000 years to keep the galaxy in a state of perpetual war. Because the parasite feeds on the neurochemical byproducts of stress and terror." She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "They are coming for me. I can hear the boots in the hall. Kyle, listen to me. Do not burn the galaxy to avenge me. If you kill them, you just feed the cycle. You have to break the machine. You have to find the source and turn it off. Protect the innocents, please. Be the man I love, not the weapon they fear." The recording cut to static. The silence in the data core was absolute. Kale stood frozen. The revelation was staggering. The evil they were fighting wasn't just ideology. It was a literal plague. The cruelty of the Empire, the 1,000-year war, the execution of his wife. It was all the result of a non-sentient organism farming civilizations for fear. Lyra made a small, choked sound. She had backed away until she hit the wall. She was sliding down it, her hands gripping her helmet. "My mother," she whispered. Kyle turned to her. "Lyra? My mother," Lyra repeated, her voice trembling. "The late Empress. She used to complain of headaches, terrible migraines at the base of her skull. She changed, Kyle. When I was little, she was kind. She used to sing to me. But as I got older, she became cold, distant. She started talking about purity and threats like she was reading from a script." She looked up at Kale, horror in her eyes. "I thought she hated me. But she was sick. They infected her. The purity doctrine. It isn't a religion. It is a breeding ground. They keep the bloodlines pure to make the hosts more compatible." She stood up, a sudden fierce anger replacing the shock. "My entire life is a lie. My family history is just a medical chart for a parasite." Kale walked over to her. He took her hands. "We know the truth now," he said. "Mira found it. Now we can use it." "Kale," Lyra said, gripping his gauntlets. "If my father is infected, if he is not in control, then we do not kill him," Kale said firmly. "We cure him, or we stop the thing controlling him. This changes everything. Lyra, we are not assassins anymore, we are surgeons." The journey to the coordinates Mira had hidden in the file took another 2 days. The tension on the ship was palpable. The discovery of the parasite changed the moral calculus of their mission, but it did not change the danger. That night, in the small, cramped quarters they had started sharing, Kyle and Lyra lay in the dark. The ship hummed around them, a vibration that went deep into their bones. "You are quiet," Lyra said. "I am thinking about the loop," Kale admitted. "Mira said the parasite feeds on vengeance, on hate. And I have been running on hate for 6 months. What if I get there? Lyra, and I cannot stop. What if I am just another host waiting to happen? Lyra propped herself up on one elbow. In the dim light of the instrument panels, her eyes were dark pools of seriousness. You are not them. Kyle. I nearly glassed the Capitol. Lyra, you had to stop me. Because you were hurting, she said. Not because you are evil. She reached out and traced the line of the scar running down his cheek. We are going to walk into a nightmare. Kale. The Synod knows we are coming. They will try to use us. They will try to break us. Let them try. Kale rumbled. No, Lyra said sharply. Do not be arrogant. Arrogance gets you killed. We need to be vulnerable. Vulnerable? Yes. We need to trust each other more than we trust our own fear. She leaned down and kissed him. It was a fierce, claiming kiss. Promise me, she whispered against his lips. Promise me that if I get taken, or if I get infected, you will do what needs to be done. I cannot promise that, Kale said. You must. I will not lose you too. Lyra. I am done losing things. They argued then, a hushed, intense fight in the dark. Lyra demanding pragmatism, Kale refusing to sacrifice her. It was the kind of argument only two people who are terrified of losing each other can have. Finally, the anger burned out, leaving only the raw heat of their connection. They came together not as soldiers, but as refugees seeking shelter in one another. It was slow and desperate, a reaffirmation of life at the edge of the void. When it was over, Kyle held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. I am not a weapon, he whispered into the dark, and neither are you. We choose this. We choose this, Lyra echoed. The broken chain dropped out of warp at the coordinates. They were in the center of a dark matter hurricane. Space here was twisted, violent and churning, and in the eye of the storm floated the sanctuary. It was not a station. It was a biological fortress, a massive spiraling structure that looked like a neuron grown to the size of a city. It pulsed with a sick, violet light. Sensors are screaming, Jax yelled over the roar of the turbulence. Gravity waves are off the scale. Take us in, Kale ordered. They didn't have to fly in. The sanctuary grabbed them. Tractor beams, thick and viscous like ribbons of light, lashed out from the structure. They wrapped around the broken chain, crushing the shields instantly. The ship groaned, metal screaming as it was dragged into the docking maw of the fortress. Prepare for boarding, Kale shouted, grabbing his pulse rifle, but no one boarded. Instead, a gas vented into the ship. It was odorless, colorless, and instantaneous. Kale saw Lyra slump to the floor and he tried to reach her, but his legs turned to water. He fell, his vision tunneling to black. The last thing he heard was the whispering voice of the station, welcoming him home. Kale opened his eyes. He was in a field of tall, golden grass. The sun was warm on his face. The air smelled of jasmine and ozone. He sat up. He was wearing civilian clothes, a simple linen shirt and trousers. His hands were clean. The scars on his arms were gone. He looked around. In the distance, he saw a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch. Kale. He turned. Mira was standing there. She was alive. She was whole. She wore a yellow sundress that caught the light. She looked exactly as she had the day they met, before the war, before the politics, before the execution. Mira? Kale croaked. She smiled. It was the smile that had haunted his dreams for months. You fell asleep in the sun again, she said, walking toward him. You are going to get a burn. Kale scrambled to his feet. He backed away, his heart hammering against his rib. This is not real. You are dead. I saw you die. Mira laughed. A light, Musical sound. You had a bad dream. My love, the war is over. We retired, remember? We bought the farm on Eden Prime. We have been here for 3 years. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm. Real. Kale looked down at her hand. He felt the pulse in her wrist. It is a lie, he said, but his voice was shaking. The Synod has me. This is a simulation. Mira's expression softened into concern. Shh. You are having an episode. The doctors said this might happen. The PTSD from the campaigns. Just breathe. Kyle, look at me. I am here. She placed his hand on her heart. Feel that? That is real. We are safe. You do not have to fight anymore. You can just be. Kyle felt a tear slide down his cheek. It was so seductive. The pain was gone. The grief was gone. He could just accept this. He could live in this loop forever with her. Why are you fighting it? Mira whispered, stepping closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. You want this. You want to be happy. I do, Kyle whispered. I want this more than anything. Then stay, she said. Just let go. In the real world, Kale was strapped into a restraint chair in a vast, dark chamber. His head was encased in a neural interface helmet. Cables pulsed with violet light, feeding into his skull. Standing over him was a figure in high ceremonial robes, a member of the Synod, but where a face should be, there was only a smooth, blank mask. His resistance is high, the Synod member said. His voice was a chorus of whispers. Increase the dopamine load, bind him to the grief construct. On a table nearby, Lyra was waking up. She was not strapped in. The Synod did not fear her. To them, she was just livestock, a vessel waiting to be filled. Lyra shook her head, fighting the grogginess. She saw Kale in the chair, his body convulsing slightly. She saw the cables. Get away from him, she screamed. She scrambled to her feet. She didn't have a weapon. They had stripped her of her blaster. The Synod member turned to her. Child of the blood, he whispered, you have returned to the fold. Do not interfere. We are fixing him. We are removing his pain. You are eating his mind. Lyra spat. She scanned the room. It was organic, the walls pulsing like living tissue. In the center was a control pillar, glowing with the same violet light as the cables. She ran for it. The Synod member raised a hand. A wave of telekinetic force hit Lyra, knocking her backward. She hit the floor hard, tasting blood. Obedience, the voice whispered. It was not just sound. It was a command in her blood. Her mother's legacy. The conditioning she had been bred for. Submit. Obey. Serve. Lyra felt her limbs lock up. Her own body was betraying her. Sit, the Synod commanded. Lyra struggled, her muscles trembling. She forced her head up. She looked at Kale. He was smiling under the helmet. A slack, blissful smile that terrified her more than his rage ever had. Kale, she screamed. Kale, wake up. It is a lie. The Synod member laughed. He cannot hear you. He is with her now. He is happy. Why would he ever want to come back to a world of ash? Lyra gritted her teeth. She thought of the mining world. She thought of the grease under her fingernails. She thought of the night in the observatory. She was not a princess. She was a mechanic. She was a rebel. And she did not obey. I am not your doll, she groaned. She forced her hand to move. She reached into her boot. They had taken her blaster, but they hadn't checked for the hydro spanner she had stuck there after fixing the recycler. It wasn't a weapon, but it was heavy steel. Lyra let out a primal scream and broke the conditioning. She launched herself at the Synod member. He turned, surprised by her defiance. Lyra swung the spanner with all her strength. It connected with the porcelain mask, shattering it. Beneath, there was no face, only a writhing mass of fibrous tendrils. The figure shrieked and staggered back. Lyra didn't stop. She ran to the control pillar. She didn't know the code. She didn't know the interface. But she knew engineering. She jammed the hydrospanner into the exposed neural coupling and wrenched it sideways. Sparks flew. The violet light flickered and turned a sickly green. In the simulation, the sun flickered. Kale looked up. The sky tore open, revealing black static. Mira's face distorted. Her eyes turned black. "Stay," she hissed, her voice overlapping with 100 others. "You must stay. You are ours." Kyle looked at her. He looked at the farmhouse. The illusion was fraying at the edges. He heard a voice, not Mira's, a voice that was alive, desperate, and fierce. "Kale, come back to me. Lyra." Kale stepped back from the woman in the yellow dress. "You are not her," he said. "I am everything you want," the thing shouted, grabbing his arms, and its grip was like steel. "I am peace. I am love." "No," Kale said. He looked at the thing with sad, clear eyes. "You are just a memory, and I am done living in the past." He grabbed the thing's wrists. "Mira is dead, and I have a promise to keep." He head-butted the illusion. Kale woke up screaming. He ripped the helmet off his head, tearing the cables loose. He fell forward out of the chair, landing on his hands and knees, gasping for air. "Kale!" Lyra was there. She was bleeding from her nose, holding a sparking hydrospanner. She dropped it and fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. "I have you," she sobbed. "I have you." Kale shook, his mind still reeling from the transition. He looked at Lyra. He touched her face, smearing blood on her cheek. "You came for me," he rasped. "Always," she whispered. The synod member, or the creature that wore the robes, was writhing on the floor, trying to reform its mask. Kale stood up. He was weak, but the anger was back. Not the blind, hot rage that had consumed him on the ship, but a cold, precise determination. He walked over to the creature. He looked down at the massive tendrils. "You steal grief," Kyle said. "Kale, you take the worst moments of a life and you build a cage out of them." The creature hissed, "We are order. Without us, there is chaos." Kale looked at the control pillar Lyra had sabotaged. It was sparking, the network destabilizing. "Chaos is better than this," Kale said. He lifted his boot and stomped on the creature's central node. There was a wet crunch, and the tendrils stopped moving. The room began to shake. The biological walls started to wither, turning gray and brittle. "The network is crashing," Lyra said, standing up. "We heard it. We didn't just heard it," Kale said, looking at the dead creature. "We just woke up the whole galaxy." He grabbed Lyra's hand. "Run!" They sprinted out of the collapsing chamber back toward the hangar where the broken chain waited. The illusion was broken. The grief was no longer a chain holding Kale down. It was the fuel that would burn the synod to ash. As they reached the airlock, Kale looked back one last time at the crumbling fortress. "Goodbye, Mira," he whispered. Then he turned to Lyra, and together they stepped into the future. The return of the broken chain to Imperial space was not a silent infiltration. It was a thunderclap. Kale Voss did not sneak back across the border. He broadcast his position on every open frequency, daring the frontier patrols to intercept him. But before they could charge their weapons, Lyra Saren struck. She did not use a gun. She used a microphone. The broken chain punched into the local comms array of the Sector 12 relay station, and Lyra's face replaced the Imperial crest on 3 trillion screens across the galaxy. She was not wearing her royal silks. She wore her grease-stained flight suit, her white hair tied back in a severe knot, looking every inch the survivor she had become. "Citizens of the Empire," Lyra said. Her voice was steady, magnified by the stolen bandwidth to reach from the core worlds to the rim. "I am Lyra Saren. You know me as your princess. You know me as the symbol of your perfection." She looked directly into the camera, her violet eyes burning with a cold, terrifying clarity. "I am here to tell you that perfection is a lie. Behind her." Five streamed the data they had stolen from the Synod's fortress. The biological schematics of the parasite, the medical records of the High Council, the proof that the endless wars were nothing more than a feeding trough for an unseen master. "We are not fighting for order," Lyra continued, her voice rising over the static of Imperial jamming attempts. "We are being farmed. The fear you feel, the grief you suffer for your lost sons and daughters, it is food for a parasite that has enslaved the throne for 1,000 years." The image shifted to show the dead creature Kale had crushed in the sanctuary, its tendrils withered and gray. "The gods are not divine. They are biology. And they can bleed." The broadcast lasted only 2 minutes before the Imperial firewall clamped down, severing the feed. But it was enough. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The Empire did not just crack, it shattered. On the border worlds, entire fleets mutinied, turning their guns on their political officers. In the core, riots erupted in the streets of the megacities. Governors barricaded themselves in their palaces as the priesthood fractured into loyalist and reformist factions, fighting hand-to-hand in the temples. In the cockpit of the broken chain, Kale watched the tactical map turn into a kaleidoscope of red and green combat zones. "We have their attention," Kale said. Jax, whose claws were shaking on the controls, looked at the chaos. "We started a civil war. Boss, that is a lot of attention." "It is distraction," Kale corrected. "While the fleets are fighting each other, the capital's perimeter will be thin." Alara checked her weapons, sliding a fresh power pack into her rifle. "Thin is a relative term." "Kale, it is still the most heavily fortified planet in the universe. And you want to walk into the front door." "Not the front door," Kale said, pulling up a schematic of the Imperial Palace, "the basement." He pointed to the core citadel. "Tonight is the Unity Vigil, the one night every year when the entire population of the capital stands in silence to honor the Emperor. The security grid cycles down its active scanners to allow the massive power draw for the atmospheric shield." "And?" Lyra asked. "And," Kale said, looking at her, "that is when we expose them. We do not kill the Emperor. If we kill him, the parasite just moves to a new host. We have to show the people the strings. We have to reveal the mechanism of control while the whole galaxy is watching." Lyra nodded. She understood the stakes. It was not enough to win the war. They had to win the argument. The approach to the capital world of Ethelgard was a suicide run. The space around the planet was a churning scrapyard of debris. Loyalist destroyers were trading broadsides with mutinous frigates. The planetary ring system, usually a pristine loop of ice and dust, was now a corridor of flashing lasers and exploding fighters. "Jax, take us into the rings," Kale ordered. "Into the rings?" Jax squawked. "That is ice gravel. It will shred the deflectors. It is the only cover we have. Do it!" Jax cursed in 3 different languages and banked the broken chain hard to starboard. The heavy freighter dove into the dense particulate matter of the B-ring. The sound was deafening. Ice chunks the size of houses hammered against the shields, sounding like thunder. The ship shook violently, rivets popping from the bulkheads. Behind them, 2 Imperial interceptors peeled off from the main battle and gave chase. "They have a lock!" Ilara shouted from the gunnery chair. "Jax, evade!" Kale barked. "I am trying," Jax yelled, wrestling with the yoke. This ship handles like a brick wrapped in lead. The interceptors opened fire. Green plasma bolts slashed through the dust cloud, vaporizing ice boulders mere meters from their hull. Kyle watched the sensor scope. He saw a massive, shifting density ahead, a wandering moonlet caught in the ring's gravity. "Jax, thread the needle," Kale said, pointing to a narrow fissure in the moonlit surface. "That is a crack, not a tunnel. It is a tunnel if you fly fast enough." Jax squeezed his eyes shut for a second, muttered a prayer to the great egg, and slammed the throttle forward. The broken chain surged. It spun on its axis, skimming the surface of the moonlet, and shot into the fissure. The walls of jagged rock flashed past the viewports with millimeters to spare. The interceptors tried to follow. The first one clipped its wing on a spire of rock and cartwheeled into the canyon wall, exploding in a fireball. The second pilot, realizing the insanity of the maneuver, pulled up, breaking off the pursuit. "We are through!" Jax shouted, his voice cracking with relief. "We are in the lower atmosphere." The ship burst out of the ring's shadow and plummeted toward the night side of the planet. Below them, the capital city glowed, a sprawling web of light. But tonight, the lights were dimmed for the vigil. "Set us down in the maintenance district," Kyle said. "We walk from there." The infiltration of the palace required more than stealth. It required audacity. The maintenance entrance to the royal sector was guarded by a squad of elite Praetorians. They were checking identification chips with ruthless efficiency. Kale, Lyra, Ilara, and 5 crouched in the shadows of a steam vent. They were dressed in stolen palace livery, the high-collared uniforms of the royal household staff. "This will not work," Kale muttered. "I am too big for a footman." "You are not a footman," Ilara whispered, adjusting a ridiculous, towering wig she had scavenged from a costume crate. "You are security detail. I am the distraction." Ilara stood up. She smoothed the front of her severe black dress, grabbed a data pad, and marched out of the shadows, straight toward the Praetorians. "Halt!" the lead guard commanded, leveling his pike. "Identification." Ilara stopped. She looked the 7-foot armored soldier up and down with a sneer of absolute, withering contempt. "Identification?" she scoffed. Her voice was an impeccable imitation of the upper-crust accent used by the palace elite. "Do you have any idea who I am, you tin-plated idiot?" The guard blinked, taken aback by the aggression. "Ma'am, security protocols are—" "I am the senior protocol tutor for the Duchess of Vane," Ilara shouted, waving her hand at Lyra, who was standing behind her with her head bowed, face hidden by a hood. "And this," she gestured to Lyra, "is the Duchess's niece, who has forgotten her ceremonial sash. We are 10 minutes late for the vigil. Do you want to explain to the High Justicar why his granddaughter ruined the seating arrangement because you wanted to scan a chip?" The guard hesitated. The mention of the High Justicar was a powerful weapon. I need to verify." Ilara stepped into his personal space, poking his armored chest with a manicured finger. "Verify this. If we are not in the gallery in 3 minutes, I will have you reassigned to waste recycling on a moon so cold your sweat will freeze before it hits the floor. Move." The guard, trained to fear rank more than enemy fire, wilted. "Go! Quickly!" Ilara sniffed haughtily and swept past him. Lyra and Kale followed, heads down. As they passed the checkpoint, Ilara whispered out of the side of her mouth, "I think I missed my calling. I should have been a duchess." Kale suppressed a smile. "Do not get used to the wig." Ilara, once inside, the tone shifted. The palace was a fortress of silence. They navigated the gravity gardens, a surreal architectural marvel where the gravity plating was inverted on the ceiling. Exotic, bioluminescent flora hung from above. their roots dangling like chandeliers. Kyle moved with the silent grace of a predator. He took point, neutralizing the few guards they encountered with quick, non-lethal nerve pinches. He was not killing tonight. He was saving his rage for the source. They reached the central junction. "This is where we split," Kale said. He looked at Lyra. "I go to the throne room," Lyra said. "The archives said the control mechanism is buried directly beneath the Emperor's seat. And I go to the security hub," Kale said. "I need to override the internal lock so you can get in. And I have a conversation to finish. Ilara and 5. Go with Lyra," Kale ordered. "Keep her safe." Lyra grabbed Kale's arm. "Come back to me," she said. Kale looked at her. In the soft light of the glowing plants, she looked fierce and beautiful. "I will meet you at the beacon," he said. He turned and melted into the shadows. The security hub was a circular room lined with screens monitoring every inch of the capital. Standing in the center of the room, watching the riots unfold on the displays, was the man responsible for it all. The Imperial Security Head, the man Kale knew only as the architect of Oreo 4. It was Lord Vane. He turned as the blast doors slid open. Kale walked in, his pulse rifle leveled at Vane's chest. Vane did not look surprised. He looked tired. He held a glass of wine in one hand and a data slate in the other. "Kale Voss," Vane said smoothly. "I expected you sooner." Kale stopped 10 paces away. "Step away from the console. Vane." Vane took a sip of wine. "You have caused quite a mess, Commander. The unity of a millennium. Undone in an hour." "It was not unity," Kale growled. "It was a cage." Vane smiled sadly. "A cage keeps the beasts out. Kale, do you think the galaxy is ready for freedom? Look at the screens. Chaos, war, people killing their neighbors over which God is real. We gave them peace. We gave them purpose. You gave them a parasite," Kale said. Vane paused. He set the glass down. "So, Mira found the deep files. She found enough to make you kill her," Kale said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No," Vane said softly. "That is where you are wrong." He tapped a key on the console. A holographic schematic appeared in the air between them. It was a diagram of the device beneath the throne, a complex lattice of neural emitters. "We did not execute your wife because she found the corruption, Kale. We executed her because she found the switch." Kale froze. "What?" "This device," Vane said, pointing to the hologram. "It is not Imperial tech. It is progenitor. It was designed to sever the synaptic link between the Synod and their hosts. It is a cure." Kale. Mira found the location. She was going to turn it on. Vane looked at Kale with a strange intensity. If she had activated it, the Synod would have lost control instantly. The shock would have killed the Emperor. It would have killed me. It would have killed half the Council. We killed her to survive. It was self-defense. "Self-defense?" Kyle roared. The sound tore through the room. "You executed an innocent woman to protect a parasite that is eating your brain." Kyle lunged. He crossed the distance in a blur of motion. He didn't shoot. He wanted to feel it. He grabbed Vane by the throat and slammed him against the console. The wine glass shattered. Vane gasped, his feet dangling off the floor. Kyle raised his fist. The metal plating of his gauntlet caught the light. He could end it right here. One strike. He could crush the throat of the man who ordered the death of the woman he loved. It would be easy. It would be satisfying. "Do it," Vane wheezed, his face turning purple. "Prove us right. Prove that you are just a killer." Kale stared at him. He saw the fear in Vane's eyes, not the fear of death, but the fear of a man who knows he is a slave to something he cannot control. Cale thought of Mira. He thought of her last message. Do not become the monster they expect. If he killed Vane now, in anger, he was just another executioner. He was just another tool of the cycle. Cale's hand trembled. He let out a breath that sounded like a scream trapped in his chest. No, Cale said. He opened his hand. Vane dropped to the floor, coughing and gasping. Cale looked down at him with cold contempt. I am not going to kill you, Vane. I am going to save you, and then you are going to spend the rest of your long life remembering what you did while you were sleepwalking. Cale turned to the console. He punched in the override codes Lyra needed. Get out of my sight, Cale said. Vane looked up, bewilderment on his face. He had expected death. Mercy was a language he no longer spoke. Beneath the throne room, in the ancient catacombs, Lyra found the door. It was massive, sealed with a glyph that predated the Empire. Ilara, blow it, Lyra ordered. Ilara planted a shaped charge on the hinges. Fire in the hole! The explosion blew the doors inward. Lyra ran through the smoke. The chamber beyond was vast and cold. In the center stood the device. It was a spire of crystalline metal, pulsing with a faint, dormant energy. It was beautiful and terrifying. Lyra ran to the control interface. It was alien, but the logic was mathematical. She recognized the patterns from her study of the archive. I have it, Lyra shouted. I am initiating the boot sequence. Suddenly, the comms crackled. Lyra, it was 5, Imperial Guard, incoming, Sector 4 breach. They are cutting through the ceiling. Lyra looked up. Sparks were raining down from the vaulted ceiling high above. The Praetorians were coming. Hold them off, Lyra yelled. I need 2 minutes. She typed furiously. The spire began to hum. The light shifted from dormant white to a rising blue. Behind her, Ilara took cover behind a pillar and opened fire at the first wave of guards dropping through the breach. 5. I need a shield, Ilara shouted. I am a logic droid, not a barricade. 5 complained, but he moved his chassis in front of her, absorbing a stun blast. Lyra ignored the battle raging behind her. She focused on the code. The sequence was complex. It required a biological key. She placed her hand on the interface scanner. Genetic match confirmed. A mechanical voice whispered, Lineage, royal. The machine recognized her blood. The blood of the oppressors was the key to their liberation. Warning, the voice said. Activation will cause a neural feedback loop, fatal to active parasites, dangerous to hosts. Do it, Lyra whispered. She twisted the final key. The spire roared to life. A beam of pure blue energy shot up through the ceiling, punching through the stone, through the throne room above, and into the sky. In the security hub, Vane screamed. He clutched his head, falling to his knees. Black ichor began to leak from his nose. Cale watched him. He didn't look away. It is over, Vane, Cale said quietly. High above the palace, the blue beam hit the atmospheric shield and dispersed, spreading across the planet like a wave of cleansing fire. Every citizen in the capital who was standing for the Unity Vigil saw it. They looked up and saw the sky turn the color of freedom. In the throne room, the Emperor sat on his golden seat. He went rigid. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed, unconscious, as the parasite withered in his brainstem. Across the city, generals, priests, and bureaucrats fell to their knees, clutching their heads as the severance took hold. The silence of the vigil was broken not by a speech, but by the collective gasp of a civilization waking up from a 1,000-year nightmare. In the catacombs, the energy discharge knocked Lyra backward. She hit the floor, dazed. The room was silent. The guards who had dropped in were groaning on the ground, their weapons discarded. They were dazed, confused, the unnatural aggression draining out of them. Lyra sat up. She looked at the spire. It was glowing steadily now. Cale ran into the room. He saw Lyra on the floor and sprinted to her. "Lyra!" He slid to his knees and pulled her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" "No," she gasped, leaning against him. "Just loud. Did it work?" Cale looked up. He could feel the change in the air. The oppressive weight of the psychic field that had blanketed the planet was gone. The silence was no longer heavy, it was empty, waiting to be filled. "It worked," Cale said. He kissed her forehead, fierce and relieved. "You did it." "Not me," Lyra whispered. "Us." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, not the sirens of attack, but the sirens of emergency response. The Empire was not dead, but the monster controlling it was. Cale helped Lyra to her feet. They stood together in the glowing light of the beacon, surrounded by the debris of the battle. "What happens now?" Ilara asked, stepping out from behind her pillar, dusting plaster off her fake wig. "Now," Cale said, looking at Lyra. "Now we have to teach them how to live without a master." Lyra straightened her spine. She looked at the unconscious guards, then at Cale. "Then we had better get started." She reached for her comm unit. "This is Lyra Saren," she broadcasted, her voice ringing out into the new, terrified, hopeful silence of the capital. "The vigil is over. Wake up. Outside." The dawn was beginning to break. For the first time in a millennium, the sun rose on a world that belonged to itself. The silence of the Unity Vigil did not break. It dissolved. For 1,000 years, the capital city of Ethelgard had known only two states of being: enforced celebration or terrified obedience. But as the blue pulse from the progenitor beacon swept out from the palace, washing over the golden spires and the packed megaplazas, a third state emerged: confusion. It started in the high balconies of the Ministry of Truth. The high priests, arrayed in their holographic vestments, stopped chanting. They clutched their heads, their knees buckling as the neural connection to the Eclipse Synod was violently severed. The millions of citizens standing in the plazas below looked up, expecting the usual pyrotechnics of state power. Instead, they saw their gods vomiting black bile and collapsing against the railing. The giant holovision screens, usually broadcasting the serene face of the Emperor, flickered. The feed from the throne room, hijacked by Lyra's earlier transmission, showed a scene of absolute disarray. The Emperor was slumped on the floor. His guards were wandering in circles, weapons hanging limp, looking at their hands as if they had just woken up from a coma. The myth of divine order evaporated in real time. Cale Voss stood on the balcony of the security hub, overlooking the city. The night air was no longer cold. It hummed with the static electricity of the beacon's discharge. Below him, the city was turning into a kaleidoscope of chaos. It was not a war of guns yet. It was a war of reality. In the Plaza of Ascendance, a group of loyalist citizens tried to start the anthem, but their voices trailed off as they saw a battalion of peacekeepers take off their helmets and sit down on the pavement, weeping. On the other side of the square, reformists were tearing down the banners of the Unity, screaming not with joy, but with the angry betrayal of children who realize their parents have been lying to them for a lifetime. Inside the hub, the tactical screens were flashing with thousands of conflicting reports. "Commander," Ilara said, her voice tight. She had discarded the ridiculous wig and was back at the ops console. "The Third Fleet is hailing us. Admiral Vance wants to know if he should commence orbital bombardment of the rebel districts." "He is confused," Kyle said, not turning from the window. "The parasite is gone, but the habits remain. He is waiting for an order to make the world make sense again. Tell him to stand down? Ilara asked. No, Kale said. Connect me. To everyone. Ilara's fingers flew across the board. Global channel open. System-wide relay engaged. You are live. Kale. Kale leaned over the balcony railing. He did not look like a conqueror. His uniform was torn, stained with the dust of the catacombs. His face was bruised. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had walked through hell to put out a fire. A holographic projection of him appeared above the city, 10 stories tall, replacing the Emperor's face. The screaming in the streets died down. The fighting paused. They knew that face. It was the face of the Star Executioner, the face of the monster. Kale looked out at the terrified billions. He did not shout. He spoke with a raw, gravelly exhaustion that echoed off the skyscrapers. My name is Kale Voss. He paused, letting the name settle. You were told to fear me. You were told I wanted to burn your homes and eat your children. You were told that fear was the only thing keeping the roof from falling on your heads. He pointed a finger toward the golden dome of the palace behind him. Look at them. Look at your masters. They are not gods. They are sick men who sold your future to feed a ghost. On the screens, the feed cut to the image of Vane, the security head, being led away in handcuffs, looking frail and human. The war is over. Kyle continued. The signal is gone. The voice in the back of your head that told you to hate your neighbor, that told you to report your brother for thinking the wrong thoughts. That voice is silent now. He leaned closer to the camera, his cybernetic eye whirring softly. I am not here to replace them. I am not your emperor. I am not your father. I do not want your worship. Worship is just fear wearing a mask. He took a breath, and for a moment, the iron mask of the soldier slipped, revealing the grieving husband beneath. I just want you to stop. Stop killing each other for a lie. Go home. Hug your families. And when you wake up tomorrow, do not look at the sky for permission to live. Look at each other. He signaled Ilara to cut the feed. The giant hologram vanished, and for a long minute, the city was silent. Then, a sound began to rise. It was not a cheer. It was a murmur, the sound of millions of people starting to talk, really talk, for the first time in 1,000 years. Deep within the royal residence, the air smelled of stale incense and medical ozone. Lyra walked through the vaulted corridors of her childhood. The servants were gone. The guards had fled. The palace was a hollow shell, stripped of its majesty. She found her father in the solarium. The Emperor, once the terrifying patriarch of the galaxy, was sitting in a wicker chair, staring at a dead orchid. He was wrapped in a blanket, shivering despite the warmth of the room. He looked small. Father, Lyra said. He did not look up. The noise. He whispered, It is gone. The whispering, it is finally quiet. Lyra walked over to him. She kept her hand near her belt, where she had holstered a stolen sidearm. She did not trust him. The parasite might be gone, but the man remained. You knew, she said. Her voice was not the voice of a daughter, it was the voice of a judge. You knew what the Synod was doing. The Emperor looked at her. His eyes were clear for the first time in decades, pale and watery. At first, I fought it, he said, his voice trembling. When I took the throne, the headaches were blinding. I tried to refuse the treatments, but the pain, Lyra, you cannot imagine the pain. So you let them in, Lyra said coldly. You let them eat the galaxy to stop your headache. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. It was not just the pain. It was the certainty. When the Synod whispered, I felt purposeful. I felt like a god. I knew who to kill, I knew who to save. There was no doubt. He looked at her with a pathetic yearning. Do you know how hard it is to rule, Lyra? To make choices? They took that burden away. They made me perfect. No, Lyra said, stepping back. They made you a puppet. And you liked the strings because they held you up. She looked at the man who had signed the death warrants of entire worlds, including the order to hunt her down. She realized with a jolt that she did not hate him. Hate required respect. She only felt a profound, aching pity. You are a victim, Father, she said, but you are also a collaborator. You traded our souls for your comfort. The Emperor slumped back in his chair. What will you do? Kill me? Make yourself Empress? Lyra looked around the solarium, at the gilded cage where she had been raised. I am not an Empress, she said. I am an engineer, and I am done fixing broken things that were never meant to work. She turned to leave. Lyra, he called after her, a sudden desperation in his voice. What happens to me? Lyra stopped at the door. You get to live, she said. You get to live in the quiet, and you get to think about what you did. I can imagine no worse punishment than that. She walked out, leaving him alone in the silence he had bought with 1 billion lives. The crisis came at dawn. Kyle and Lyra met on the landing platform of the Sky Needle, the highest point of the palace complex. The wind was whipping Lyra's hair across her face. Below them, the situation was deteriorating. The initial shock had worn off, and the old hatreds were flaring up. A massive fleet of rebel ships, the same ones Kale had inspired, had just dropped out of warp in low orbit. They were not hailing Kale. They were charging their weapons. They are targeting the palace, Ilara yelled over the comms. It is General Harkin. He says the head of the snake must be burned. He wants to glass the entire royal district to ensure the Synod never returns. Kale looked up at the sky. He could see the glint of the rebel destroyers. Harkin is a butcher, Kale said. There are 5 million civilians in the royal district. Servants, clerks, families. He says they are collateral damage, Ilara reported. He says we cannot leave the symbol standing. Kale looked at the control console on the platform. He still had access to the planetary defense grid, the vein shield, the surface-to-orbit ion cannons. I can stop him, Kale said. His hand hovered over the console. I can vaporize his fleet before he fires a single shot. Lyra looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders. The old instinct, the star executioner, was waking up. Kyle, she said warningly. If I fire, Kale said, his voice hard, I killed 10,000 rebels. My own allies, the people who fought for me. If you do not fire, Lyra said, Harkin kills 5 million people. It was the impossible choice, the choice of emperors. To kill the few to save the many, or to let chaos reign. Kale looked at the targeting solution. It was perfect, clean, efficient. He closed his eyes. He thought of Mira. Justice is not the same as cruelty. But this wasn't cruelty. This was math. This was war. Kyle opened his eyes. He looked at Lyra. If I shoot them down, he said, I become the new tyrant. I become the man who kills dissenters to protect the palace. And if you let them burn it? Lyra asked. Kale looked at the golden spires around them. Then we let it burn. He stepped away from the console. Ilara, broadcast on all frequencies. Tell the civilians in the royal district to evacuate. Open the subway tunnels. Give them everything we have. But tell General Harkin, tell him the shields are down. Kale, Lyra grabbed his arm. You are letting him destroy your victory. No, Kale said. I am destroying the symbol. If the palace stands, someone will always want to sit on the throne. If it is ash, we have to build something new. He grabbed Lyra's hand. We have to go, now. They ran for the broken chain, which was idling on the pad. Minutes later, as they rocketed toward the upper atmosphere, the sky turned white. General Harkin's fleet opened fire. Pillars of coherent light slammed into the Imperial Palace. The golden domes shattered. The spire of verdicts, where Kale had once stood with Mira, crumbled into dust. The explosion was a flower of fire and tragedy, blooming over the city. Kyle watched it from the viewport. He did not look away. He knew that history would judge him for this. They would say he failed to stop the destruction. But he knew the truth. He had refused to be the god who decides who lives and dies. He had stepped aside and let the Empire die the only way it could. Violently, irreversibly, and completely. The aftermath was not a celebration. It was a fracture. In the weeks that followed, the Ethelgard Empire ceased to exist. In its place, a chaotic, squabbling collection of states emerged. The Federation of Independent Systems formed in the core. The Border Alliance declared sovereignty in the Rim. Warlords seized sectors. Democrats wrote constitutions. It was messy. It was dangerous. It was free. Kale and Lyra found themselves stranded in the middle of the storm they had created. They were not universally loved. Far from it. On the human worlds, Lyra was burned in effigy. They called her the alien witch who had tricked Kale Voss into sparing her father. They said she was a symbol of the oppression that had enslaved humanity for centuries. On the alien worlds, Kale was reviled. They called him the tradition breaker, the human savage who had desecrated the sacred capital and humiliated the gods. They could not stay in the core. They could not stay in the Rim. They retreated to Oreo 3, the mud world where they had first met. It was quiet there. The rains washed away the past. One evening, they sat on the porch of a prefabricated HAB unit, watching the twin suns set through the drizzle. Kyle was cleaning his rifle, not for war, but to keep it stored. Lyra was reading a data slate, reviewing the drafts of the new constitutional charters she was secretly advising on. They hate us, you know, Lyra said quietly. She did not look up from the screen. I know, Kyle said. I saw a broadcast today from the Centauri system. A politician called for my trial. He said I carry the taint of the Synod in my blood. Kale stopped cleaning the rifle. He looked at her. And the alien isolationists say I am a human contaminant who ruined their purity, he countered. Lyra put the slate down. She looked out at the rain. We broke the world, Kale. We saved them, and they hate us for it. That is how you know we did it right, Kale said. He put the rifle down and leaned back in his chair. If they loved us, it would mean we were just the new masters. We gave them the freedom to hate us. That is a gift. Lyra smiled, a small, weary curve of her lips. You are a philosopher now. Star executioner. I am a survivor. Lyra, just like you. She stood up and walked over to him. She sat on the arm of his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. The touch was grounding. In a galaxy that was spinning apart, they were the only gravity that held. Kyle looked up at her. His hair was graying at the temples now. The lines around his eyes were deeper. I miss her, Kyle said suddenly. It was the first time he had spoken Mira's name in weeks. I know, Lyra said softly. I look at you, and I see the woman who saved me. But I also see the ghost of the woman I lost. Lyra nodded. She did not flinch. And I look at you, Kale, and I see the hero who freed me. But I also see the soldier who served my father. She leaned down, her forehead resting against his. We are not replacements. Kale, I am not Mira. You are not the innocent man she married. We are the wreckage that survived the storm. We are damaged goods, Kale murmured. We are repaired goods, Lyra corrected. And that makes us stronger. Kale turned his face to hers. The kiss was not the desperate collision of the observatory, nor the fiery passion of the rebellion. It was slow. It was deliberate. It tasted of rain and endurance. It was a choice made by two adults who knew exactly how dark the universe could be, and chose to light a candle anyway. The epilogue, 1 year later. The memorial was simple. It stood in the center of the crater where the Palace of Verdicts had once been. It was not a statue of Kale. It was not a statue of Lyra. It was a wall of black obsidian, polished to a mirror sheen. Etched into the stone were names. Millions of names. Humans, aliens, soldiers, civilians. There was no distinction of rank. There was no separation by species. The names were mixed together, an alphabet of tragedy. Near the bottom, at eye level, was one name. Mira Hale, diplomat, wife, human. Kale stood before it. He touched the name with his fingertips. He was not wearing a uniform. He wore a simple civilian jacket. He looked lighter, as if the armor he had worn for 50 years had finally been shed. She would have liked it, a voice said. Kale turned. Lyra was standing there. She wore a suit of dark blue, practical and elegant. She had just come from the Constitutional Convention in the new Federal Hall. She hated statues. Kale agreed. She said pigeons were the only ones who appreciated them. Lyra smiled. She stepped up beside him, looking at the wall. We passed the article today, she said. The purity law is officially struck from the record. Cross-species marriage is recognized as a fundamental right in all 12 sectors of the Federation. Kyle nodded. And the Synod? We have established a watchdog committee. No more secret councils. Total transparency. If a leader wants to rule, they have to do it in the daylight. It won't last forever, Kyle said. Corruption always grows back, like weeds. Then we will garden, Lyra said firmly. We will keep pulling them up. She took his hand. They stood there, an ex-imperial princess and a retired executioner, holding hands in front of the monument to the woman who had brought them together. People walked by them. Some stared, some whispered. A few looked at them with gratitude. Most just looked at the wall, searching for their own dead. Kale looked at the reflection in the obsidian. He saw himself. He saw Lyra. He saw the city rising from the ashes behind them, messy, loud, chaotic, and alive. He realized then that the empire had been a structure built on the fear of death. But civilization, true civilization, was what happened when you accepted death and chose to live anyway. Are you ready to go? Lyra asked. Kale squeezed her hand. Yes, he said. Let's go home. They turned away from the wall, leaving the dead to their peace, and walked out of the crater, together, into the messy, beautiful, terrifying world they had made. Empires fall to weapons, eventually. But they only stay fallen when truth clears the rubble, compassion heals the wound, and courage dares to love beyond the fear.